Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City or Nova Scotia. Good evening if you are somewhere in Bohemia or Vienna or Berlin. Greetings, as always, to our loved ones in Ukraine. Stay strong, keep the spirit, keep the fight. We love you. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays, in which I have people join me for conversations who deeply inspire me. And this is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Idagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Idagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. And this show was founded April 24th, 2020, with my friend Thomas Hampson as my guest. And it has always been about who inspires me. And sometimes I have people who I know at a distance. Other times I have people I'm very close with. That's an example. Today I have my friend Aaron Cohen, who is one of the very best at what he does. And we're going to explore what Aaron does. It's in music, but it's a niche within a niche within a niche that is highly specialized. There are very few people who do it at all, and even fewer who do it well. So, Aaron, welcome. And then I'm going to tell our friends what you do, or try to.
Well, thank you so much, Fred. Good to see you and
Good to see
delighted
you.
to be here.
So I mentioned Nova Scotia. Aaron is from Halifax. He's Canadian, although he now lives in New York City, where he joins us. And Aaron and I met in 2004 when he and the very talented reporter Jad Abumrad, who Americans know for his program Radio Lab on public radio, were very young men at the time, and I was young-ish, and they were working on a program about Wagner's Ring Cycle and why there are people such as Fred Plotkin who are just crazy about the Ring Cycle, know everything you can know about it, attend it constantly, speak metaphorically about the characters, quote from it, debate it endlessly. And they approached me and asked if I would participate in this program where Jad was the young reporter who wanted to find out, and Aaron is the producer. And I said, yes, and I have the title, which is what Wagner people do. They don't wait for you to hear the title. They give you the title. And I said, you're going to call the program The Ring and I. And that's exactly what the show is called. And I was one of the prominent figures in the program, I think it's fair to say. And Aaron and I, and Jad, but especially Aaron and I, became very close and began to think about other projects that we might work on through the years. And we've done many. Aaron reminded me that I helped pilot a show for him on American Public Media in 2007. And then I suggested that we go to Italy in 2008. The primary reason was Puccini was turning 150, had he lived. And we started to do programming about Puccini that was done for a program here at New York Public Radio called Sound Check, hosted by John Schaefer, who was my guest on the show a couple of years ago. We went to Pesaro, where the Rossini Festival is. We went to Macerata, which is one of these beautiful outdoor opera festivals in the Marche. And then I helped Aaron edit a program that we're going to talk about called Clash of the Titans, an exploration of Verdi and Wagner that was done in 2013, the bicentennial of the birth of Verdi and Wagner. Now, yes, I met Aaron through Wagner, but I'm also very much a Verdian. And I've done many things with Aaron through the years, but primarily I've loved watching his growth and work, because what he does, his radio programming, is not just a show, but it's part educational. It's an ingenious blending of music and narrative, where the music tells stories, the words tell stories, and then together the music and the words tell a different story. And it's a bit like going to an opera to listen to an Aaron Cohen program. And Aaron, I'm going to get this out of the way right away. One of the words that's most overused now is storyteller. I'm a storyteller. I want to be a storyteller. You know, my dog catcher is a storyteller. Everyone now is a storyteller. And unfortunately, that word has been devalued. Yes, you certainly are a storyteller, but I'm going to ask, unless you disagree with me, that we sidestep that word because it's lost its meaning. And I would really
Okay.
like you to talk more about what has impelled you to create this remarkable body of documentation. I would sooner call you a documentarian, but with a different narrative means than most. Documentarians tend to have music that sits behind the words and the images. You, for the most part, don't use visual images, you use sound, and therefore the mind has to work differently. The mind of the listener has to work differently in that you create imagery with the words that you choose, but also the sound. And I will finally say that one of the things, many things I love about Aaron's work is it's always in the right proportion. The music doesn't dwarf the words, but it supports the words, but sometimes the music is the topic. And therefore, we need to have the music come forward. And it's just something I really admire in how you do this. And I guess my first question is, how did you start thinking about this? And how did you develop this particular style that I can't think of anyone else who does it quite as you do?
Oh, wow. Well,
Well,
thank you, Fred, for that incredible introduction. My goodness. I think, my background is a classical musician, and so music has always been my great passion. And when I started doing radio programs, the idea of marrying the two, finding a way that my love of music and my background playing music could fit together with a lot of the talk types of things I was doing and I was hearing on the radio. When you work at the radio, people are coming in for interviews all the time. There's a lot of talking about things without, they're pointing to something else. So the idea of putting the two together, I feel like with my programs, it's almost a reverse engineer kind of situation where if you, for example, let's say you had John Williams' Star Wars soundtrack and you just had the music, but not the movie. And then you sifted through the score and you said, okay, that sounds like Darth Vader's theme. So we'll put him on the screen every time this piece of this theme comes in. And that's kind of what I do with the music. I'll go through whatever topic I tend to, as I prefer music topics, but I'll kind of map it out and sort of get a sense for the landscape. What kinds of things can we talk about? What types of conversations would fit on top of where? And then do it backwards, where the music is dictating to me what order we have to talk about things. Sometimes when I'm working with my editors who are just working on the script, and I know the music and I've put everything in order because of the music, they're just looking on the page and they'll say, oh, this part would be much better at the end. I'm like, well, we can't put it at the end because the music's way too loud or too soft, or, it doesn't. So there's sort of a second level that happens with that. And over the years, I've done more and more. I love it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite sort of way to, it's a great challenge to make that work. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to draft and redraft many times, but when it does, I find the listening experience is just great because the music, it's almost like you're surfing the wave of the music as the program takes you where it's going.
I do want to tell listeners that Aaron has a day job that most people would be completely overwhelmed by just doing that. He is director of programming operations at New York Public Radio. This, for people outside the country, should know is our national public radio, which is a network based in Washington. But all around the country, we have local stations, and the biggest and most powerful and prominent is New York Public Radio, known formerly as WNYC, New York City, founded, and correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, in 1924, so we're coming up to the centennial. A number of years ago, it incorporated WQXR, one of our classical music radio stations, where I have worked a lot. And I came aboard not immediately through WQXR, but I suppose the Ring and I is what got me in the door in one way or another. And then I've done many, many things for WNYC and WQXR. But in addition to doing that, and talk about what you do actually as director of programming operations. That's no small job.
Well, I tell people that I'm a stage manager for a show that never ends, because what I do is I keep all the balls in the air. I don't produce the content, but I work with all the content producers. And I think some people are kind of confused because the two jobs I do, I mean, what I do for the station in terms of the on-air stuff is so different from the producing I do. And when I started at the station, I was a producer, and then I switched to this job, and I still produce sort of on the side. I kind of do the producing independently. But yeah, I mean, I love it because it's very exciting. You know, you're sort of on air, you're in the middle of everything. New York City is quite a place to be when you've got all sorts of exciting guests from all different, you know, parts of, you know, the world, and different things they're doing in life, and every different topic you can imagine is being discussed. And it's one of those things where I just enjoy working with a big group of people. I have a wonderful set of colleagues, and they're totally different. The two things I do between the the on-air stuff versus the production stuff. The on-air stuff is so immediate. You know, we're covering President Biden's speech, or we're covering, you know, and so all of these, it's logistics. It's almost, I think of it almost like Tetris. You have to sort of fit the pieces you have together. Okay, this show has to air at this time with this group of people, and these are the resources we have. And so that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. I've been doing that since my boss left. I was a producer. He did this job. He left, and they asked me to do it because I was covered for him, and I enjoyed it. So I took it on.
Well, I mean, just so listeners understand, New York Public Radio is both a news institution, very much so, and more than ever, and a cultural institution. Right. And there are, let's call them, 3 radio stations: the FM side, which is 93.9. Am I okay?
Correct.
I just have it automatically set so I don't look. Yeah. And the AM side, which is 820 AM. And what that means is that you sometimes have the same programming going on both, but often you have different programming going on each, and listeners have to know where to go to. And then you have WQXR, which is 105.9 FM, and that's the music side. And then there are various streams and feeds that happen at New York Public Radio. Is it wnyc.org? Yes?
Yep. Yeah.
I think, okay. And so and there are apps, so that what happens now is that what used to be the metropolitan area of New York City is now a worldwide news and arts institution. Yeah. And for people who don't know, my friends in Italy are always shocked by this. This is public radio. It's nonprofit. We don't have commercials and advertising, and almost all of it is paid for by listeners. And you don't have to subscribe. It's not like the BBC where you pay for your license every year. But 3 times a year, they do a fund drive where listeners are asked to donate. And based on that, you and your colleagues do the programming for the year and have income and buy new microphones and toilet paper and every single thing that's required at a station, from the glamorous to the banal. And yes. And it's gone on this way for many, many years. It's a remarkable thing because it relies on the confidence that your listeners will support you. And you do not adjust your programming at all in terms of content, in terms of news angle. You cover the news as news. Right. And as print journalism has sort of declined all over the world, but certainly in America, New York, and a lot of times broadcast journalism on radio and television is frankly dedicated to who was just stabbed or shot or pushed in the subway. WNYC almost uniquely occupies coverage of things like City Hall, of meetings of city councils, of things that happen in New York City that concerns the people of New York City. It was founded by the mayor, LaGuardia, of New York City nearly 100 years ago. So it's a unique institution that I'm very proud to be associated with, and I say that openly. I'm proud to be associated with Adagio as well. It's a different kind of thing. It's a streaming service. But Aaron, I suppose my question in all of this is, when you and I who work in the media, but when anyone who talks about the media refers to the media, it's a kind of a word like storytelling that I think we just have to put out to rest for a while, because it's lost its meaning. If you were asked to define the mission, the role, and the profile of New York Public Radio, how would you define it?
I think I'd say, it's all for the public good. We're trying to inform people. We want to give people the best information we can, things that are useful to them, things that are hopefully also uplifting, things that they need to know about that maybe are very serious. I mean, we try to present a full picture of what New York is. I keep thinking about we have an archive department. I'm not sure what year is the first broadcast that we actually have recorded. I know that we have all kinds of stuff, but I think what a tremendous thing for New York, the history of New York. I mean, we're coming up on 100 years. I mean, we weren't recording in the 1920s, but the fact that you could, if you wanted to, you could listen to, 70, 80 years of New York history just straight through is amazing to me.
The archivist is named Andy Lancet, and
That's correct. Yes.
Like the Aaron Cohen in his section, that not everybody knows him, but he plays a crucial role in what this institution is. So let's get back to the fact that in addition to doing this heavy lifting and juggling the balls, I will say, by the way, because I'm a night owl and I listen to the radio, occasionally, let's say there's a BBC feed at 3:20 in the morning and I'm listening, and suddenly, boop, it goes out. I won't call Aaron at that hour, but I will send him an email and saying, do you know the BBC is not on? And typically you're awake at that hour. And I've noticed, and you get to it and suddenly it gets fixed from your home.
Well, Fred, you've given me some of the greatest tips ever for when we've had problems on the air, because you are up in the middle of the night. And I do get, and I remember many of them.
I mean, yeah, there have been a couple where one time something was just repeating. It was a sound that kept repeating.
We have a long list of different kinds of technical issues that can come up any time of the day or night. So we we try to take care of them as quickly as we can. Sometimes it's easier than others, depending on where the problem is and what's going on. But middle of the night is tricky because, of course, we don't actually have hosts there who can come on and tell you what's going on, and we have to kind of dance around that.
In the past, there were hosts.
Yes.
Yeah. And I, as a late night person, remember listening to the host, and on some occasions I did some hosting at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning because I was the only person alive and awake at that hour. But, now that there is streaming and podcasting, people are listening all over the world. I have friends in Italy, for example, who listen to New York Public Radio, and especially WQXR, and they hear programming from New York, but of news and also classical programming. Now that people can inexpensively call in when there are shows such as All of It or the Brian Lehrer Show, where listeners call in, it's no longer just from the Bronx or Staten Island. It might be from Geneva, Switzerland. There was one recently from Geneva, or from Seattle, Washington. And it's just fascinating the way this station has taken on a worldwide profile. It's different, say, from the BBC, where they do beautifully packaged programming, but not necessarily listener call in. And to have Brian Lehrer, for example, take a call from Geneva or Stockholm, giving information about what's happening at that moment in Geneva or Stockholm is very interesting, but perfect for New York as a worldwide city, because we have the United Nations here, and we have people from every country in the world, literally every country in the world, and they speak for their communities. Last year, there was a fire in the Bronx in which, unfortunately, people died. And many of the people who were in that building were from the Gambia in West Africa. And suddenly we had links to people in the Gambia who were calling in from that country, which is not a high-tech country. And we created on the radio, I say we, I was not doing it, but I feel connected to it, the sense of connection between a fire in the Bronx where Gambian people died and their relatives back in the Gambia. And it's a new kind of radio. It's a new kind of media that I don't think is fully understood or appreciated by the general public. And it's not unique to WNYC, but given the character of New York City and the size and the financial size of New York City, it does it differently even than Washington, D.C., which is where National Public Radio is headquartered. They're great too. It's a different kind of experience. And a couple of years ago, I had on Michelle Martin, who is the weekend anchor on National Public Radio, and she's the best at what she does, I think. So, Aaron, I now want to get to the fact that you have grown exponentially in the quality of your work, in my opinion, and I'm an expert. So, because I want to start with the fact that The Ring and I, which is about a 16-hour piece of music that covers everything in the world experience that one can think of, and then some. You and Jad, I won't say condensed, but made essential in 58 minutes. 4 operas that basically is one long story. And to me, the remarkable thing about that program is most 58-minute shows about The Ring barely scratch the surface of one topic in The Ring. And this one really packed it in. Now, how did you and Jad decide to do this? Was it the audacity of being very young men at the time and not having fear the way Siegfried does not have fear? I had to get that in.
I can assure you we had some fear.
But it didn't show. And, it was, Jad is a wonderful presenter. It was beautifully edited and written by you and Jad, but I think the editing and the interlacing of the music was you. That it was never about, wow, let's listen to The Ride of the Valkyries, or wow, let's listen to The Magic Fire. But suddenly you'd hear the Magic Fire just sort of beneath the surface as Jad was talking about it, or talking about stage technology, or talking about any number of things that you addressed. How did you two, was it that you were only given an hour, so you had to do it an hour, but then how did you two decide with this massive work of art, Gesamtkunstwerk, this total work of art, figure out how to make a really fascinating program in 58 minutes, which, by the way, listeners can find by searching The Ring and I, and you'll hear it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were given an hour, and we knew it was a big topic. I think as we did our research, we discovered it was even a bigger topic than we thought. And I think that's where the fear came in, when we realized just how big a thing we'd gotten ourselves into. We were looking specifically for guests who would be fantastic to help us tell this story. I think Fred, of course. What's interesting about your appearance there is that even before I met you, your Ring tours with the food were somewhat legendary. I was told by the producer of Soundcheck, oh, you must talk to Fred Plotkin. He's got this thing with food and the Ring, and and so as soon as
for people to know, I did a series in the New York Times when the Ring production, which I helped work on at the Met, was new, and what to eat when attending the Ring, and then watching it at home, and how to cook, and thematically, gastronomically, but also digestively, that you don't want to eat something that will require you to get up during the first hour of Gotterdammerung's third act and have to run and take care of things. How to eat, how to drink, how to sustain yourself. And then recently I just did a show for the BBC about what opera singers eat while performing. And because it's crucial. So yes, I had done that, and I guess Soundcheck brought me to your attention. But the way I did it on the show, because you had me do it this way, was I told I was the through line to tell the story of the Ring cycle.
Right.
And I counted, I appeared on 13 different times in 58 minutes, which is terrific. Wow. But Jad would say, let's go back to Fred and find out where we are.
Yes.
And then I would say, so Brunhilde has been sleeping for 18 years, and then I would take it from there.
Right, right.
And
Well, we did the whole thing. We did the whole thing in
Fairway Supermarket.
Fairway, right on the Upper West Side, where I think we talked to you for what, 2 hours. I wonder what the other, shoppers must have thought of you walking around with two guys with microphones and headphones following you everywhere. You're picking up stuff, you're talking.
Holding up swordfish and rock shrimp.
Right.
And
Rheingold beer was there.
Rheingold beer and something
right.
flambe.
Yes. It was just that was a lot of fun. I
mean, this in all seriousness, yes, what I did was what the Italians call spiritoso, which sort of means, giddy and funny and so on. But in the program, it was profoundly serious.
Yeah, well, it worked so well. Yeah,
like I was ridiculing Wagner or the Ring or people who care about the Ring, because I was, I'm a ring nut, as we're called, and it was very. I mean, what I loved about the program was it was very serious, but it turned thousands and thousands of people onto the Ring who would never go near it. And you had heavy metal, you had psychiatrists, you had all kinds of people coming in and weighing in on the meaning of the Ring. So there's the word really. I think that you and Jad went after the meaning of the cycle and let the music support it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's probably, that sounds right. I mean, it was very difficult to get it down to an hour and to figure out what parts to use. And, we had a lot of tape from a lot of different people, and then all this music. And I remember some late night cab rides with Jad where we were, coming home very late from working. Sometimes we were working all night. We'd be in cabs at 5 or 6 in the morning, and we would have these terrific brainstorming sessions where we would get some fantastic aha moment just as we finish. And then the next night we'd kind of know where to start. We just, it was a trial and error, a lot of, we had, when we interviewed you, I don't know that we knew that you were going to be one of the key figures
Narrator.
in it.
Yeah.
But then once we put it together and we could hear how it was like, oh, well, this is perfect. And it's sort of just figuring out who goes where, how to balance the proportions of it. And all of this has to be thought of also with the music. The music, in my mind, always comes first. You always want to be making sure that even if you're not, the music's in the background, that you're somehow getting to, you're going to the musical places that it's trying to take you. And we had, there were some interviews that didn't end up in the show. We went to a comic book store because there are some comics of the Ring. And I remember that interview because it was really terrific and it was fascinating. And I didn't know about that. And I still have the comics back there somewhere, but it just wasn't going to fit with the group that we had. That, when we put it together, it was like that just didn't work. So, I have drafts of it where actually what we're talking about is fascinating, but it just wasn't going to fit into the hour. So it's a lot of it sort of sifting it down to what works, keeping the whole thing in mind as this 1 hour show.
But how do you, and when you're working with someone like Jad Abumrad, how do you decide ultimately what's important? Because when something is as big as the Ring cycle and you only have an hour, it's a very different endeavor than what you're doing now that we are going to talk about, where you can embrace everything.
Right.
But if you are limited to an hour, tough decisions have to be made. And sometimes you say, wow, that material is fabulous, but has to go on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
How does that happen editorially? And is it the producer? Is it the reporter? Who has the final say ultimately?
Well, Jad was the senior producer there, so he had the final say.
Okay.
But he and I worked very closely together. I can't think of anything where we would discuss everything and come to an agreement. I can't think of any place where he just said, we're doing this. It was very much a collaborative process, and his creativity, as the whole world knows, is phenomenal. Just incredible.
He's won the so-called MacArthur Genius Grant Award subsequently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what for me is amazing about what he can do with sound is extraordinary in terms of juggling a lot of different things. He can take voices speaking and play with them like great jazz music and improv stuff. I feel what I do is I'm really focused on the music. I can sort of get the music to figure out how to make the music work with what you're talking about, but I don't know that I could take what you're talking about and turn it around and upside down and all these incredible things he can do. And that's
Well,
that's
I'm
in the
just going to say
project, that's
this
in the
for
ring as
me.
well.
I'm going to say this just for me, that sometimes radio programming to me has too many voices.
Ah,
And I feel like I'm in a noisy room with a lot of conversation going on. And
mm,
I find it very hard to follow the ideas in a thread, not the voices. I can do that.
mm,
But because I'm a music lover and I love Wagner and Mahler, I can listen to great lengths of music without requiring some reinforcement.
yeah.
I can listen to a person speak at length
Hmm.
and draw more from that than I would from many voices at once. I'm not criticizing Jad here, but what I'm saying is
Mm,
his is more like jazz, as you said.
mm,
And it's a very different approach. It's a very fine approach
mm,
to the subject matter that he covers. But
yeah,
to me, when the subject is music, you can't just sample.
right.
You've got to go deep.
Yeah.
And you have made your life's work in terms of special programming that you create,
Mm,
correct me if I'm wrong, all about music.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So each sound is different. Actually, I meant to ask you something before that let's get to now. I was talking before about NPR, New York Public Radio. I think it's fair to say, and disagree with me if you wish, that there is a particular sound to NPR,
Yes.
to the sound recording, once upon a time to the voices that appeared on NPR, which were not necessarily stentorian broadcast voices, but they were of real people, but people who spoke very well. They didn't speak in slang. They didn't say and like and they spoke very well.
Right.
And some people on NPR still do that. A younger generation is a little more, I'm like, and I said to her, and she said to me, that speech. But the sound is unmistakable. And also not just the way people speak, but the audio resonance,
Mm,
RESONANCE, resonance that happens on NPR. The BBC doesn't have that. I can't think of any other station. Maybe certain German Rundfunk broadcasting has that deep sound,
mm.
but nowhere else. Now, you as someone who works constantly with sound production, am I wrong about this? Am I right? Is there a secret?
I don't know. I feel like we have a real lack of pretense. We're telling you what we have. We're being honest. We're presenting things without a lot of fancy extra hard sell or anything like that. There's a both an honesty and a matter of factness about it that's I find refreshing. That's why I like to work there. And I think that also comes, you were talking about the callers that call in. I think they can feel that. That's what we welcome, all these different conversations, people from all over the world speaking with all kinds of, different life experiences. And so it's all this wonderful mix, and we let it all flow out there. And I think there's a certain sense of, I think, honesty about it myself.
I agree. And
Yeah.
for example, the other day there was a caller to the Brian Lehrer show who was born in China. And it was around the time of the Lunar New Year. And he was talking about his experiences as a man born in China and then how he observes Lunar New Year in New York City. And he became very emotional and his accent was kind of thick. It was decipherable,
Mhm.
but I suddenly felt that I had a window into a culture more than if it was a Chinese American who spoke in regular American English.
Yeah.
And what I mean by the sound, I literally mean that there's a certain gravity, and not in the sense of being serious, but
Mm.
there's a resonance, the low notes of voices. When I speak on NPR, I sound different than I do in other media.
Huh.
And it's
Well,
not my speech, it's the way I'm being recorded.
mm. Well, we
I
have.
like how I sound. That's not a complaint, but I like very much how I sound. But what I guess the point I'm making is I find that you in your music documentaries
Mhm.
emulate that NPR sound.
Mm, mhm.
Maybe in the pacing, maybe in the lack of overdubbing
Yeah.
that one would hear on commercial radio, where there's a visual equivalent. If we are watching, say, CNN or Fox News, and you will have the image of the broadcaster, and then you will have the picture of the news event happening, and then you'll have what's called the crawl, the words underneath.
Yeah.
Then on BBC, there'll be another news band below that in white. And it's
Right.
so incredibly distracting, and the viewer is required to multitask, that he never or she never fully focuses on content.
Mm,
And what we have on NPR is the absence of all of those extra bands and windows and images. We have the story, the news
yes.
story, or we
Mhm.
have the narrative, and we have people listening very carefully in addition to people speaking.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's singular in the world to me.
Mm.
And I do love that. But
Me
I
too.
do
I love it
find
too. I mean, we
that
don't
you,
sensationalize. We don't
no, you
sensationalize,
don't.
and we keep it very, as you say, focused. We're not
But
distracting you with lots of other things.
so I think maybe I've unlocked something unintentionally here. Your music programming has that same aesthetic, but it's about music.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no clutter,
No.
and it is told in words and in music, and occasionally in both.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say that, for example, you and I did some pieces live in 2008 from Italy,
Which we
covering
did.
the Puccini and the different festivals, where I would go directly on air, and you produced it from Italy to soundcheck in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have 4 minutes or 9 minutes, and we always had to know we only have X amount of time. And
Mm-hmm.
the decision making that has to happen, number one, if we pre-record, but number two, live, that I, as a speaker live, have to know that at a certain point, Aaron will give me a signal to, you have to slow it down or speed it up or whatever, those hand gestures that happen on radio. And I don't think you were, no, you were not there. One time I was in Italy and then Greece when
Mm-hmm.
Luciano Pavarotti was dying. And I went to see him because we were friends. But then when he actually died, I was in Greece. And I went on Soundcheck and did a live stand-up report for Soundcheck and for NPR about Pavarotti's death. And I didn't have an Aaron standing there saying, you only have X amount of time. And I had to know how to speak about Pavarotti in meaningful ways, not knowing if I had 2 minutes or what turned out to be 13 minutes, which was a big chunk of time to
A
talk
lot of
about the
time.
death of a world famous tenor on live American radio.
Yeah.
You and I are a little different in that you enjoy recording and creating beautiful products. I like doing that, but I love the excitement of live.
Mm.
And it's a different set of nerves and adrenaline to do that, because
Yes.
with a recording you can create something of beauty and maximum impact and accuracy. And I, as someone who likes to go live, has to sort of be on his feet and react to the moment.
I actually like
And
to be live, Fred. I just don't want to be in front of the microphone. I want you to be in front of the microphone.
okay,
We're live together,
all right.
but I'm not the one talking. That's how I.
But what happens, we had this problem in Italy where we had some technical problems when we were
Mm.
going live about Puccini. And what has to happen then when, let's say, I'm standing on my cell phone, as it was then,
Right.
and broadcasting live to New York, but through the speakers in New York? You were with me in Italy, but there's someone who would be at the studio in New York
Yes.
handling that. It's my motto is live by technology, die by technology. It's wonderful for what it can do, but if
Mm.
we become reliant on it or lionize technology, I think it's a problem.
Mm.
I don't know how you feel.
You know, I if I recall, the problem we had was some of the clips that we had, the order didn't quite line up with what, but it was fine because you pivoted based on what the clips when they were played, and John Schaefer, I believe, was interviewing you, and he pivoted and actually worked out fine. I mean, I don't think people knew, you guys were both so
Not
great.
really, but that's
And
because John Schaefer is the very best at what he does.
he really is extraordinary.
He
I think
is.
at the station, I really do feel that we have some of the greatest radio hosts in the world. I mean, these people are untouchable, just
Yeah.
incredible. I've loved working with them. I've loved listening to them.
I agree.
Yeah.
So now I want to let's go chronologically. Let's get to 2013.
Okay.
Clash of the Titans, an exploration of Verdi and Wagner. This was a radio documentary. Now, we know that you thought to do it because it was the bicentennial of the birth of Wagner and the birth of Verdi. Wagner, May 22nd, 1813, Verdi, October 9th or 10th of 1813. So they were contemporaries. They were the two pillars, the titans of opera. They were the two leading cultural figures. They were political figures. And how did you envision doing this? Because it's exponentially much bigger than The Ring and I, because Wagner wrote 15 or so operas and Verdi 28, and lives, both of them, very consequential lives. And how did you think to wrestle that topic? How did you decide on your vision for where to go? The title itself, Clash of the Titans, already says a lot about Wagner and Verdi and their impact on the arts and culture and politics in 19th century Europe. Yeah. How did you gestate this?
Well, I didn't know that much about Verdi. I had to do a lot of research. And what's interesting, I knew Wagner because, of course, we'd done The Ring and I'd done a lot of studying for that. So I kind of knew what I was getting into on his side. I really didn't know. We didn't have the title Clash of the Titans. That came sort of later. We knew. I can't remember if I was approached by the station, I just know that there was this anniversary, that big anniversary, and that was why we did it. But the thing was, as I read more about Verdi and I listened to more of it, I mean, I knew I'd been to the opera, I certainly hadn't seen all of his operas, but I didn't adore him like I do now, which came through that intense year of preparation for that show. For me, the biggest takeaway from that program was not the program itself, but my just profound love of Verdi and his music and the incredible, I just had no idea. And, the more you dig into that, that was one of the great things for me. I think as I did that research, I was aware that, boy, these guys are totally different. Everything, the music is different. The values in their lives are different. The arc of their lives are different. Their sort of lasting legacy in terms of the buildings they left us, because Wagner left us Bayreuth, which was paid for by somebody else and is a temple to his music, to him. And Verdi left us the Casa di
Riposo per Musicisti, a retirement home that he built in Milan,
yes,
entirely on his own, and he helped design it as a place where musicians in their retirement years would live and still do. It opened October 10th, 1902. And when I'm in Milan, I go by there and it's a magnificent institution. Yeah. And in addition to that, he built hospitals for workers. He built all kinds of things for other people. Whereas, as you said, Bayreuth, thrilling though it is, and I'm happy to go there, thrilling, is a monument to Wagner himself.
Yeah.
And to his Hochkunst, his great art, which it is. It is great art.
But what a contrast in terms of one person who just people can't throw enough money at him. Wagner couldn't keep just spent it all, and it was always spent on his stuff. Verdi was one of the probably richest opera composers of all time, and he used it to do wonderful things for other people and to help with all kinds of things. And it's that's where I think once those polarities became clear to me, the title kind of, found itself there.
But if you say come to fall in love with Verdi as a man, how does that affect, if it does, your relationship to his art?
Well, I love
And
the
if
music.
you
I love
fall
both.
out of love with Wagner as a man,
Yes.
how does that affect your relationship with his art?
That's interesting. I'm listening to less Wagner than I used to. I'm not sure why. I don't think it has to do with that. It's just I um, haven't been going to performances. I mean, with the pandemic and everything. That's interesting. I don't know. I mean, for me, I still adore Wagner's music, even though I find the man pretty repulsive. So, the music, it's always about the music. I do tend to divorce them in my mind. It's nice to be aware. I'm glad I understand who he was and what some of these things, but the music is magic, and you just can't get
And to me,
past that.
not just the music, but with one except there's one Wagner opera I just don't like, but all the others I really, really love.
Really, which one
And
don't you like, Fred? That's interesting.
it's one of the long ones.
Well, they're all long. I don't think he.
I'm not gonna. I don't want to declare it because then it becomes, oh, Fred Plotkin doesn't like.
Okay.
And I don't want to be saddled with that because I don't want to have to defend my dislike for that opera.
Hmm.
But there's one Verdi opera I like of the majors that I like much less than all the others. Doesn't mean I don't listen to it. And this particular Wagner work, I do, when I have 5 or 6 hours, we'll sit down and listen to it occasionally and admire its craft musically. But the story doesn't speak to me. But the Met is about to do Lohengrin, and I'm going 3 times. And there was a year, I think I'd have to check the dates, but pre-pandemic, maybe 2016 or 17, that I called the year of living Lohengrin. And I traveled anywhere a company was doing Lohengrin and just did a total immersion in the opera, studied every note, every word, every inflection, every idea, what Liszt had to say about it, Liszt's role in how Lohengrin was presented. And the year of living Lohengrin was a fantastic year for me. And now we have it coming to the Met for the first time in 17 years, and I'll be going 3 times. And then I'm lecturing before the HD about it because I'm that into it.
Yeah.
And many of Wagner's works, I could just revel in and study. Right now, they're doing Tannhäuser at the Royal Opera House in London. I wish I could be there for that. It's a great cast, and Tannhäuser is an opera that speaks to me very much more deeply than does Lohengrin, and I love Lohengrin. I can hear every note of the Ring very happily, except maybe about 15 minutes in Act 2 of Valkyria. But apart from that, every note of the Ring, and I never tire of the Ring, and I find new meaning in the Ring. Whereas I think with Verdi, and I never said this before because I never thought of it this way before, what I look for in Verdi, where to me the works are brilliant and meaningful and essential with no extra notes and so on, I look more for interpretation. Oh, I never thought about this before. In Wagner, I look at what Wagner created. In Verdi, I look at the interpretation. Wow. Thank you, Aaron.
Anytime.
And because, for example, this season at the Met, they're doing their production of Traviata with 3 different violettas. And I've seen Nadine Sierra, and I've seen Ermanello Yaho, and I'm going to see Angel Blue, and they will all be very different violettas, and I can look at that interpretation. I can, yes, stage productions of Verdi and conducting of Verdi, but really what the performer does with a character, with a role. They've had Rigoletto a fair amount in the past couple of years, and I've seen different casts, and it's the same production, but the interpretations of the characters are profoundly different. So, Aaron, you just opened up something for me that in all my years of doing this stuff, I've never really thought about before, that for Verdi, I go for the interpretation. And that's why I keep going to Verdi. There's also more of it to go to. Wagner, when Wagner comes around, it's an expensive undertaking. And we're grateful that they come, and we're grateful to all these singers who do all the work. But we immerse deeply, but we immerse in the master. And, yes, I'm so looking forward to these wonderful singers who will be in Lohengrin, but they're at the service of the master.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I don't want to hog this discussion, but what do you think about where I just kind of went with this unintentionally?
Well, there's something about Wagner that is just it's I know what you mean, that it's such a profound experience to listen to. He's getting so deep inside you that everything else kind of disappears because he's touching you in such a profound way. Not that Verdi doesn't do that, but it's different. They're just I think they're different, and Wagner has this. I do think it's magic. It's unbelievable how that music works, and how powerful it can be. It can be life-changing. It can be life-changing.
Yep.
Yeah.
The music itself can be life-changing in Wagner. Yes. Never mind the stories, which, yes, that too, in most cases.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the situations that happen in Wagner are very old style operatic with curses and potions and so on. That when people see it in Verdi or Donizetti or Rossini, say, oh, how ridiculous. He swallowed a poison and he has a curse on him. Well, how about in Wagner? Wagner has the biggest curse of all. Alberic's curse, that Azucena cannot come up with a curse like Alberic's curse. Or Monterone and Rigoletto. And so Wagner is very conventional in that regard, but it's his musical layering. It's his musical evocation of the emotions, not just of the characters, but the emotions that it can stimulate in the listener are very particular. Whereas with Verdi, it's me following the lead of the artist singing a particular role and her taking that music and those emotions and me going completely with her. But she's taking the lead. But somehow with Wagner, he takes the lead and he grasps deep inside of us. That's my experience of it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I've never discussed this with anyone because I never thought of it before. And this, listeners, is why we do what we do. And we never get bored and tired. And people say, oh, you've seen La Traviata how many times? 150? Aida, 150? Tannhäuser, 100? Yeah. And I'm just getting started. So it seems that in some cases, but not always, we focus on anniversaries. So Puccini was 2008 and Wagner and Verdi 2013. Then 2014 came Richard Strauss.
Yes.
Tell me about Aaron Cohen and Richard Strauss.
Well, that was one that I was really eager to do. I've always loved Strauss. I played some Strauss in the orchestra when I was
You're an oboist.
Yeah, playing the oboe and loved that experience. Strauss wrote some spectacularly difficult oboe parts, but all the parts are difficult in Strauss. So I got to feel that firsthand. But the music is amazing, and it also, honestly, I thought of it as a nice warm up for Mahler. Even at that time, I knew that Mahler was what I really wanted to do, and I thought this will be a great chance to try that, just to try this kind of a project.
And what did you do with Strauss?
What's that?
What did you do with Strauss?
Okay, it was a one hour radio documentary in 2014 for his 150th anniversary.
Yes.
Of his birth. And
yeah.
Yes, and
June 11.
it was and I had an interesting experience with this one because the plan was, it was a 1 hour show. I was going to do 20 minutes on the tone poems, 20 minutes on the operas, and 20 minutes on his life. And the idea being you hear his orchestral music, his opera music, and then once you are familiar with the sound of those, then you get to hear about the man himself and see how interesting it is, the overlaps with the music you just learned about and his life and how they actually tie together. But what happened is that none of the segments ended up being 20 minutes. Almost all of them were 30, 40 minutes. And I had to figure out what to do. And we ended up putting the longer versions of each section on the web and then scaling it down to an hour for the radio. And that's really where I started thinking, okay, if I were to do a podcast, I could get rid of this 59-minute, where you're locked into this 59-minute clock because that's the way radio works, and that doesn't have anything other to do with keeping things organized on the air. When you have a lot of different shows, if they were all different lengths, it'd be very complicated to just run them all the time. So this is radio convention, and it was eye-opening for me that, oh, okay, which is what I ended up doing with Mahler, where the podcast segments are the real thing. Those can be any length, and then I pare them down for the radio, and they air on the radio. But the radio is the sort of the diet version, the shorter version, and that's kind of what happened with Strauss. I still feel that the real version of the Strauss program is the longer segments, because I had to, and it's this is heartbreaking stuff to do. You've spent a long time crafting this 30-minute thing, and you have to cut 5 minutes. Well, you've already chopped it down a lot, and so this can be, I'm sure, film editors, I can't even imagine when you've spent years on this, and then you have to at the end cut 10 minutes of which you've spent. Anyway, and the shorter it gets, the harder it gets to cut.
Yeah.
But anyway, one thing that was originally part of that project was I was going to try to host it myself for the first time. I was thankfully talked out of that idea when Margaret Juntwaite said to me, Deborah Voigt, would be great. And I knew she's this incredible Straussian singer who would be perfect. And she agreed to do it. And she was a delight to work with. And she just was wonderful. And she made the show just sparkle. So that was also a great experience working with her. And also I made a good friend on that program. Interesting that, Fred, you and I came together to be friends during the Ring, and my friend Paul Thomason, who's a great Strauss scholar, I met because I spent a couple hours interviewing him for the show, and then we became friends. Because like the Ring and the Verdi Wagner, I fell in love with all of Strauss's music and fell in love with all of that stuff, most of which I didn't know. I knew the orchestra stuff and some of the operas, but I really didn't know a lot. I mean, he's got 15 operas, of which I knew 2,
9 of which premiered in Dresden.
Yes.
And that to me is a fascinating story. That the audience in Dresden seemed open to what Strauss had to offer, so that something like Electra, which is not for everybody, had a very warm reception in Dresden, whereas he was from Munich and he spent a lot of his time in Vienna, and somehow those cities were not as welcoming to him as Dresden was. And it's an interesting little sidebar that if he couldn't produce something anyplace else, he could always do it in Dresden.
Yeah. I think he was also quite upset with Munich because his original production of Guntram, which was his first opera, didn't go over very well there, and he always sort of held it against them, and he wasn't happy about that.
But here's another example. We talk about Wagner especially, but other composers in terms of their personal biography. And Richard Strauss lived from 1864 to 1949. Yes. He lived through 2 world wars. He lived in overlapping the lifetimes of Wagner, of Verdi, of Mahler, of lots of composers, of the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of Hitler. He lived through so much in his particular time frame, and some of his music entirely reflects that, like Metamorphosen. Others, which I think is a magnificent work.
I agree.
Others seem in no way cognizant of the fact that all of these horrors were happening in the world. He was one of the founders, along with Hofmannsthal and others, and Max Reinhardt, of the Salzburg Festival in 1920. He was the founder of, I don't know the name in German, but the organization to make sure that composers get royalties for their works done. And in this, he was inspired by Giuseppe Verdi. He corresponded with Verdi. It's little known that there was a correspondence.
I didn't know
and
that.
Strauss, a very practical man who also knew how to save his money, wrote to Verdi and asked for Verdi's advice on that, and then told Verdi that he, Strauss, particularly loved Falstaff, the character in Verdi's last opera. And so when I teach Falstaff and the Rosenkavalier now, I always point out the fact that Strauss, to some degree, modeled Baron Ochs on Falstaff. And
It's
we know
interesting.
this from Strauss's effusive declarations to Verdi about his feelings about the character of Falstaff.
Huh.
So, but Strauss lived through all this. Are we supposed to, with him or with any composer, saddle him with the burdens of the history of his time? Was he a member of the Nazi Party? Did he have a Jewish relative? And did he help that Jewish relative? It seems that everybody has a different view of Strauss based on their feelings of the politics that surround Strauss.
Yes, it's a tough one. It's a pretty big stain on his career and his life that he joined the Nazis. And I've heard arguments that he was, he was awfully naive. Politics were never his thing. He said long before the Nazis couldn't stand politicians and all that stuff. That was not what he was interested in. And maybe he thought, we have some people in the program talking about, he thought that this was just a passing fad. He didn't really take them seriously or at their word. I'm sure he wasn't alone. There were many people who didn't see what was coming. There were many who did, but it was, I don't think it was, I think it was just so complicated. And I mean, he was fired by the Nazis because he insisted on having Stefan Zweig's name on the program for the opera they'd written together. And he wrote an opera just before, I think it was right before the war started, right? Where there was actually a protest against war and the Nazis banned it. So it's not, and his daughter-in-law was Jewish. I don't know. I don't understand why he did what he did, why he joined them and agreed to, it might have been the title he was given. He was finally going to be put in charge of deciding what's good music and what's not, because I know he thought a lot of the current stuff that was being composed was a lot of garbage. So he just had a lot going on. I'm not making excuses for him. I don't really know. It is a complicated situation.
And a big difference, of course, is that he was alive during all of that while Wagner died in 1883. And yet Wagner is the one associated with the Nazi Party, which was founded 50 years after his death, because his music, especially Die Meistersinger, but not only, was deputized to propagandize for the Nazis. Whereas Richard Strauss was alive in all of that and was composing Capriccio and Ariadne of Naxos and things that may seem or may not seem to be related to what was happening politically in the world. Except for Metamorphosis, which is a work that I think everybody has to learn and listen to, because that to me is his most overt expression of his understanding of war and what had happened and what the Nazis did, and even more than Four Last Songs, which people often see as a valedictory. They're wonderful songs, but they look to a different direction. And they've been deputized now by people who want to be spiritual and talk about where we're going next, whatever that is. And it brings up a larger topic of how music, classical music in this case, but not only, gospel and soul and all kinds of music, is deputized for other purposes. And whether the creator intended for that to happen or not. And the big difference, and we will now get to Mahler, is that Mahler has come to symbolize all kinds of things in terms of his life story, that people use his life story and some of his music to describe everything that they feel they have to explain about the world. There is a film that some people have seen, I don't know if you have, called Tar, starring Kate Blanchett as a conductor who aspires to conduct Mahler's Fifth Symphony. I don't want to give the film away for those of you who will see it, but let's say she aspires to conduct it, and let's leave it at that. But Mahler has become sort of a catchword for the big human emotion, the big effort, the wrestling with destiny and with the gods, even more than Wagner, I think. In terms of the human condition, because Wagner created these characters who spoke of the human condition in very subtle ways, actually,
Mm,
whereas Mahler is much more hard on sleeve, I think, and
mm.
much more schmaltzy, much more sentimental,
Mm,
much more where we tend to take the little snippets of his biography that we know, such as his relationship with his wife, such as his heart condition, such as the deaths of many of his brothers and sisters, the
mm,
presence of death in life, the death of children,
mm,
um, facing life in the shadow of death, all of that, that I think everyone can load onto Mahler as they see fit.
mm.
And yet, to that, I would add that Aaron Cohen, who is in the midst of creating your own ring cycle of the life and work of Mahler over a very long period of time, it's a
Yeah.
very different undertaking now. It's called Embrace Everything, and that's what you do, in that it's being done over the course of years
Yes.
and is really an ongoing study and immersion into the life and work of Mahler that's very different from your 1 hour programs, wonderful though they are, that you did in the past. This is, how did you now get to this point where you want to embrace everything as regards Gustav Mahler, the life, the music, all the symphonies, the 9 or 10 or whatever number we use,
Yeah.
um, the songs, the life. How did this start, and did you know ahead of time that you would be doing an ongoing project for years?
To some degree, yes. I two thoughts that just come up after listening to what you've been saying there. Just referencing what we've spoken about before. I have the same feeling with Mahler as I do with Wagner, in that he gets so close. He reaches so deep into you with that music that there's a magic there that is unlike anything else. And I feel like him and Wagner are the two that have that. Um, and also, I think that the 9 symphonies, 10 symphonies, and Das Lied, this is one big ring cycle. This is one big long symphony in 9 or 10 parts. Actually, they kind of so there's some interesting parallels between those two in that way musically. So I knew that I wanted to do this. I always liked Mahler growing up. I sort of, being an oboist, I enjoyed just the purely orchestral symphonies. And then when I got a little older, I liked the ones with the vocals and the voices. But in my 30s, I realized that I was going to every Mahler, I'd go to lots of concerts, but the Mahlers were must go to. I would map out the whole year in advance of what was coming through New York, what could I see? And those were concerts I had to go to. And so I sort of knew that he had a meaning to me that was much more profound than any other composer. And then,
Can you express what that meaning is?
well, it just, he moves me in a way that is so profound, and I just keep going back to the works. I can never get enough of them. I've just finished season 3, which is all about Mahler's Third Symphony, which is a symphony that's 100 minutes long. If you listen to all 6 episodes back to back, it's 3 hours. And I've probably heard each of these. I've probably heard these pieces now over 1,000 times each in terms of editing and trying to make everything work. And I still can't get enough of it. It still reaches me in such a way that it's just, I'm so grateful to him for having created these just monumental works of art that I can go back to. And I see different, as we were saying with some of the other, new things every time. As I'm in a different place in life, I see different things. But I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with him. And I actually thought it was going to be a radio series at first. I started officially in 2010 was when I sort of started investigating this, doing my homework on him, reading up on him. I actually went to QXR and pitched the idea. Why don't we do a bunch of, programs on the Mahler symphonies? And Graham Parker, who was the in charge of QXR at the time, wisely said to me, "Ooh, that sounds really expensive, and that's pretty big, And of course, it was a lot like the Wagner. I didn't quite know just how big it was, and I'm glad he said that. And he suggested, well, why don't, instead of doing this huge thing, why don't you start with some little, short intermission features? And I did. a 10-minute feature for one of our Carnegie Hall Live broadcasts when the Berlin Philharmonic came through and did Mahler 2. And I did a 10-minute feature, which really gave me a good sense that I didn't quite have what I needed. So I was going to have to spend a lot more time researching, learning, reading, traveling a bit to get up to speed. And officially I started in 2015. The first interviews were done in 2015, and I've been kind of collecting them since then. You know, orchestras come through here all the time. If they're doing Mahler, I'll typically reach out. And I think my requests are maybe a little unconventional. And then I'll say, I want to talk to your principal clarinet player. You know, I don't necessarily need to talk to your conductor or whoever the soloist is. No, I need to talk to the, you know, your percussionist. So, and I, you know, sometimes these interviews are done very open-ended. Other times I'll go and I'll say, I want you to tell me what's happening in bar 247. I need to know how that works. What do you think about that? And it took a couple running starts. You know, I thought I was going to launch it in 2018. Didn't have, I made some, I didn't quite understand exactly music licensing and the costs involved with that. I thought that I didn't understand just how expensive that was going to be. And only at the end did I realize there's no way I can do this. I had just assumed I could just use one recording for the whole thing, which I could never afford, as I found out at the end after having used it. So I then had to spend the next year rejiggering the whole thing. And I still wasn't ready to launch in 2019. And then I was finally ready to launch in 2020. Season 1 was done. I had it finished. It was going to launch with the Amsterdam Mahler Festival, and then the pandemic hit. And I thought, well, I mean, it was a perfect place to launch the Amsterdam Mahler Festival. This was going to be this huge, you know, celebration with all the orchestras that Mahler conducted, playing all his symphonies in Amsterdam. And people, I mean, Mahler and Amsterdam, they were some of the first. That was one of the first orchestras to really embrace his music when he was alive.
It's often said that the big three for Mahler are Vienna, Amsterdam, and New York.
Right.
In terms of his impact, I know that I've had access to the archives at the New York Philharmonic, and you could look at Mahler's scores, not only of his music, but of Beethoven and others, where his notes and his markings are in the score.
Yes.
And conductors and students such as myself go in and learn possibly what the great conductors and composers of 100 years ago were thinking about that.
Yeah.
And that's just a remarkable thing that these archives have them. And as you said, many of his works were done primarily in the Netherlands, Amsterdam at the Concertgebouw, in Vienna in different venues, and in New York primarily at Carnegie Hall. And he conducted a lot at the Metropolitan Opera, but he didn't do operas particularly, so he conducted other people, Tristan and Isolde and Falstaff and Fidelio and things like that.
It's another interesting thing about him that he didn't write operas because he was known as such a great opera conductor. And I've sort of wondered about that. I've now talked to a lot of people. I find it interesting. Leon Botstein said to me something that finally resonated to me, that Mahler, he didn't spend his time reading, you know, Strauss was always looking for the libretto, the next story that he was going to set to music. Mahler was spending all his time reading philosophy. So he wasn't going to, you know, he wasn't going to, and also I think opera was just too concrete for him. He didn't want a character with a name. He wanted an idea that was going to float around, you know, and kind of do what Wagner does with music, but without Brunhilde in the middle of it.
But also there were the logistics of Mahler's life, that he had money to earn, and
he did.
I mean, we're making this very short now, but he converted to Christianity to try to get work in Vienna when doors were closed to Jews.
Yes.
But nonetheless, people said, well, you're still a Jew, you're always going to be a Jew. But he conducted what we now call the Vienna State Opera, and all kinds of things and innovative productions. But at a certain point, he just did not feel welcome in Vienna anymore. And he went to New York. And we here in New York had this brief but glorious period in which we had Mahler conducting at the Metropolitan Opera, at the New York Philharmonic. Then Arturo Toscanini came in. We had both of them. There was a period when Richard Strauss came to New York, and Strauss, Toscanini, and Mahler were all conducting at the Met and at the Philharmonic.
Can you
It's just
imagine?
legendary. There's just
Yeah.
not any period like that.
Wow.
And
Wow.
they, three of them, left an imprint, I say, in our musical DNA in New York that we're still benefiting from.
Yeah.
Because the New York Philharmonic in a particular way experiences the music of Mahler. And it helped that Leonard Bernstein was one of the great advocates and interpreters of Mahler, starting in the 1950s and for the rest of his life till 1990. And we have all of Bernstein's recordings and Bernstein's total immersion that people my age, as a child, I grew up learning Mahler, watching and listening to Bernstein. So Mahler, I mean, there's another way of looking at it. Maybe you want to do this on your show, is WQXR every year at Christmas time, listeners call in with their favorites.
Yes.
And, you know, it used to be, it would be the Beethoven Ninth, the Fifth, the Seventh, the Dvorak Ninth Symphony, maybe the Grieg Piano Concerto. But now Mahler is creeping into those top 5 and 10 and moving out some of the others.
Sometimes he's not. My big hope is that he'll eventually take number one. He has yet to do that. Beethoven 9.
Over the Beethoven 9, I don't think that'll ever happen.
No, you can't dislodge Beethoven 9. This year, actually, in their countdown, I love that countdown. That's so much fun. And so subjective, of course.
Yes.
But it really is just, I always enjoy, you know, where did everybody land this year? Which but you're right, Mahler is making inroads, certainly in the top 20, top 10. I think last year maybe he had 2 symphonies in the top 10. This year, I don't think he was in the top 10. He was in the top 20, but he had more. I think 6 of the 9 symphonies were in the top 100.
That's remarkable.
So, you know, still he's there.
Yeah. So let's talk about him a bit. And I want listeners to know that, as always, I ask my guests to recommend certain symphonies and recordings. And what I did in this case on the page is I put the Adagio link to every piece of music by Mahler in the Adagio catalog. So have at it, listeners, because you can find everything. But we have symphonies number 1 and 2 and 4 and 7, Das Lied von der Erde, which is, I call it his Fellini symphony, is 8.5. And then the Mahler 9.
Yeah.
Aaron, pick one of these symphonies and just talk about it. Not because it's your favorite, but just which one of the 9.5 or 10,
Well,
whatever number we use.
I can say that, I mean, having now done the first 3 seasons, each season is one of the symphonies in the podcast. So season 1 is the first symphony, and there's 4 episodes, 1 for each movement, and that's how we're going through the whole set of symphonies. I mean, the first 3 have a very special place for me because I've spent so much time with them. The one of the recordings I gave you, the 4th symphony with the Czech Philharmonic and Beechkoff, which is wonderful recording, brand new recording. I think it came out last year. That is just, the 4th symphony is so different from the first 3. And that recording for me captures really the lightness of it. They use, you know, Mahler, even though he's thought of to be Austrian, he actually was born in what is currently the Czech Republic. So he's, you know, he's Czech. And I remember because I interviewed the Czech Philharmonic people when they were here performing Mahler too, and they kept saying, no, Mahler is ours. He's not German, not Austrian, he's not Jewish, he's Czech. I was like, okay, yes, he is. And so there is something in the way they play it that is just feels very truthful and true. And they use a lot more sort of gliss and with the strings, and there's a wonderful lightness to it. So I definitely recommend that one. But I remember when you asked, I also said, well, anything by Leonard Bernstein, anything by Sir Simon Rattle, anything with Bruno Walter, because these to me are these are just the great Mahler conductors. And anything.
And Mahler knew Bruno Walter.
And Bruno Walter gave Leonard Bernstein his big break when Leonard Bernstein had to fill in for that famous moment at Carnegie Hall, which kicked off his whole career in his 20s. It was Bruno Walter who was out sick.
Everything connects.
It's amazing.
But I
amazing.
mean, seriously, when we talk about music,
Mm.
let's take violinists, that they talk about having learned from someone who studied with Joseph Joachim in Vienna, and they
Yes.
see themselves, or what's his first name, Eugène Izet, the Belgian
Yes.
violinist, that we see these people as descendants. So Joshua Bell might be in one line, and let's pick another violinist, and Sophie Mutter might be in a different line.
Yes.
And it's not, I don't think it's fetishizing. I think it's just that we who love music understand that we're connected to something much bigger and longer, and a
Mm.
legacy, and that we're the heirs to it. And it's not a museum thing, but it's something that we can study endlessly, at the same time creating new art and new music. And that's very important, that new work always be created. And it won't necessarily be understood or admired. Mahler was not always understood or admired, and
Oh,
Verdi
no.
and Wagner were misunderstood, and
Mm.
very few had an easy ride
That's true.
among the creators.
It's
But
true.
one thing that I know about Mahler, because I'm a traveler, is that he had three different composing huts, as they would be called in German, or houses, or studios, perhaps in English,
Yeah.
in different parts of what was then Austria-Hungary.
Yeah.
Now one of them is in Italy. But I visited these places. I don't know if you've been to any of them.
I haven't. I've been wanting to go. I have
Yeah.
not.
When you realize that in one place he wrote the fifth, and another one he wrote Das Lied von der Erde, and you see the surroundings, you hear the nature, which, because the one in on the lake in Wörthersee in Carinthia has such a deep, lush sound acoustically around him that you can hear how certain music would come out of there. Whereas the late music, the eighth, the ninth, the Das Lied, were composed on this very high hill, not by lake, with a different view and a thinner air and bird
Huh.
song. And it's so interesting to me to just sit in those places alone for
Mm.
hours and hear what may be what Mahler heard. Because yes, there's the occasional passing automobile, and stupidly in Toblach, or Dobbiaco in Italian, they've put a little zoo not too far from where Mahler lived, and
Huh.
therefore you occasionally hear the squawk of an animal
Uh-huh.
that Mahler would not have heard. He may have heard a reindeer or an ibex or something like that. Not a reindeer, but a alce in Italian, an elk.
Mm.
Um, and but it's just fascinating for a man who evoked nature so much in his music to be able to sit in the places where he created that music.
Yeah.
And
Like,
what I began to say is, he worked 9 months of the year conducting either in Vienna or New York, or
mhm.
occasionally on tour, and his summers were devoted to composition.
Yes.
So I think part of why he may have not done an opera, and only part of it, is that you need more time to write an opera unless you're Donizetti.
Mm.
And he could not sit for 2.5 months in the summer on an Alp and write a whole opera.
Mm.
Whereas
Well,
he
there was
may be able to get a symphony or much of a symphony done.
two thoughts I have. Well, he did write an opera, The Three Pintos, which
Yes.
was sort of with, themes by Weber, which was before he wrote the first symphony. And so he's writing in the style of someone else. So I don't know if that really qualifies, but
It
it's,
does, but we never
I
see it, almost
right,
never.
we don't see it, but it is wonderful music. And the other, there was apparently rumors, his friend Siegfried Lippener, who was a poet and playwright, and he looked up to Lippener for a long time. They'd been in school together, and Lippener was kind of it's funny, Lippener was famous as a teenager, and his fame he disappeared as he got older, where Mahler's fame just went up. So they kind of crisscrossed.
Mhm.
But there was talk that he was going to set an opera to one of Lippener's, because Lippener was writing a trilogy.
Uh-huh.
And it was apparently discussed. It was in the papers that this was being talked about. And you read some of the correspondence between them, and you can see, Mahler was quite taken, if he, I don't know why it didn't happen. Lippener had a problem with finishing his plays. He would write them and then destroy them because he wasn't happy, and he'd start all over again. Apparently he did this several times. So maybe Mahler, it's also possible Mahler just got tired of waiting for that if he was planning on doing that. But I kind of think what he found his niche with the idea of these philosophical symphonies that ask big questions, and you can dive as deep into them as you want. And even if you know none of all the stuff that's packed in there, it's an incredible listening experience. You can know, it's just that's I find the really amazing thing with this. Same with Wagner too. It'll just overwhelm you, and you don't need to know anything. The music is so extraordinary.
How do you feel about works of music that have names, whether it's Tchaikovsky's Little Russian or Pathetique Symphony,
Yeah.
or Mahler's Symphony of a Thousand, or Titan, or Resurrection, or Beethoven's Eroica or Pastoral?
Mm.
I'm very ambivalent about giving names to these works, because then we are conditioned to listen in that framework. Whereas if I just said to you Beethoven's Third Symphony,
Right.
and you take with it what you want, that to me is a more pure experience.
Mm.
And I try not to read, certainly when I approach a work I don't know, the biographies, the letters, the name of the symphony, to whom it's dedicated,
Right.
Brandenburg Concerto, whatever, the Goldberg variations. I try just to look at it as music and experience it that way, so that I come to my own narrative choice. Because sometimes I feel that the composer, whether he or she named the work or whether the work got a name independent, is burdened by that name.
Yeah.
And by the literalness that a word requires, that is completely different from the free-floating fantasy that music, pure music, asks of us to engage in.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying, Fred, because in fact, when I think of the Mahler symphonies and the ones that have titles, Mahler, I mean, he removed all those titles. He didn't want his symphonies to have titles, and they've stuck with us because, I mean, Titan, his friends, I think, really were encouraging him to give some names to these things. The symphony had been just a disaster, the premiere. So the thinking was, let's add some titles and things to help people understand it. And then he withdrew all that. But and he removed this. He had a bunch of titles for the Third Symphony, which he removed as it was published. I think he would agree with you that these things he wouldn't, they do encumber us with other thoughts and associations, and he didn't want that. And at some point after the Fourth Symphony, or even after the Third, really, he stopped trying to tell you, we don't have, he gives us a lot of wonderful clues in the first few symphonies, and then those all stop. We don't have titles in the same way anymore when he really decided, I've had enough of this. And I think he found that people were taking it the wrong way. What's that?
The Eighth has a title,
Symphony of a Thousand, but I'm not sure, did he give it that name, or that's what it was called because of that first performance? I think that's one of those ones, he didn't, the Resurrection Symphony, he didn't give it that name.
No, I know.
And I think the Seventh also sometimes is not a song of the
when you
night,
see Symphony of a Thousand being performed by 637 musicians.
Well, Symphony of 637 doesn't have quite the same ring. So
but when you are in the face of such towering human achievement, and you do not have the constraint of the hour, and you can plan differently, and I mean this question in all seriousness, how do you plan your life? And I don't mean your working life, because that you do your working life excellently, and I wanted listeners to know at the very beginning what you, quote, do for your real job, even though you have two real jobs. But I think that if I, for example, were asked to write a book and they would say to me, you have 10 years and 50,000 pages, not words, but pages. That would be a very different thing from you have 3 months and you have 30,000 words. In terms of framing my creative process, and in terms of focusing my thoughts, because your initial works were constrained by that. When you went to Graham Parker and he said, oh, a Mahler programming of the type you're after would be very expensive, and he was right. But nonetheless, you are kind of doing that on your own terms, but you are doing that.
Mm.
I believe that you go to foundations to get support to do this, and I encourage every foundation to support this wonderful work. But how do you plan it, execute it? How do you stay on schedule? How do you know that, okay, I've said everything I have the room to say on the third symphony, and now I have to go to the fourth, even though the third, there's more I could say. How does this happen?
Well, you're touching on one of the reasons why I wanted to do this as an independent production, was because I wanted some freedom in terms of the timing. When you're working for a big bureaucracy, there's a lot of deadlines and things, and everybody is all locked into these, and it's very hard to move some of those things. And because this project was so big, and because I knew that it was each one of these symphonies is a whole different can of worms. They're all very different. The third symphony was 100 minutes. Well, I'm about to start on season 4, and that symphony is, much, much shorter, half that. So it's a whole different thing. And I wanted to be able to kind of map out each, take the time I need with each symphony, and have the freedom that if it doesn't quite work or I run into problems, we'll just delay it. With the first season, I'm sure, I couldn't, have work at a company where I'm supposed to deliver it in 2018 and then I don't, and then I say I'll deliver in 2019 and I don't, and then I finally do it in 2020. It's like that kind of flexibility just isn't built into those systems. So this allowed me to kind of do some trial and error, which I needed. I learned a lot. And so now it's, it'd be great if I could put one out every year, and I don't know that I'll be able to, but I'll try. And it's really about how much can I, because each of these require a lot of study and a lot of prep work. And so it is, I do like the flexibility that comes with, I get to set the deadline based on what I determine how much time I think I need. When I get to the 8th symphony, I think that's going to take a long time, actually, based on what's involved with that one. But in terms of, I have an incredible team that I've put together that I'm thrilled with. I have an amazing set of editors, a team of them, and I'm bouncing ideas off of them, and they're listening to the drafts. And I always know if all of them tell me this isn't working, I know it's not working.
You have to keep them alive and healthy and fed and all that.
What's that?
Yeah, you're a producer too. You're not only creative producer, you are executive producer, and you have to keep them. If they're going to be with you over the course of years and decades,
yes,
it's an enterprise that has to be kept going in every sense.
Yes.
And also you're younger than I am, but at a certain point you start looking at the number of years and energy and so on. And that forms a kind of editing process as you think, what creative things do I most want to do, and how will I get to do them, and what creative things would I abandon? Michelangelo, for example, worked for 45 years on the tomb of Pope Julius II.
Wow.
45 years, because the Pope kept saying, when a Pope dies, the new Pope says, don't work on his tomb and art, do my art. And Michelangelo lived through 13 papacies.
Oh my goodness.
But he nonetheless felt that he had to finish the tomb of Julius II. It was not the big project initially planned, and ultimately became the Moses that we see the St. Peter and Jane San Pietro and Vincoli Church in Rome on Via Cavour. But initially there were going to be, I think, 40 sculptures, I'm not sure, but a lot of sculptures. And now it's just one big one and 2 little ones. But, even a long creative life like Michelangelo, who lives well into his 80s, or Verdi, you nonetheless have to think about the time allotted and the creative energy that we possess and what inspires us and what we want to do. And I could see, for example, living with Mahler, or you living with Mahler for your whole life. I more do that with Wagner and Verdi.
Mm, mhm.
But in doing that with Wagner and Verdi, it means I don't necessarily do it with Mozart, with whom I would love to do that.
Right.
And that's no judgment on Mozart, and I could name others too. But I mean, just the richness of Mozart's 626 works is phenomenal.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
yet I study Mozart all the time. I happily go deep into his life. I've lectured and taught Mozart a lot, but I don't see myself as authoritative about him as I am about Wagner and Verdi, just to
mm,
name two.
mhm,
And Berlioz, who's one of my passions, that not everybody loves Hector Berlioz. Today being February 3rd, the New York Philharmonic is doing, with Herbert Blomstedt, who's 95 years old, is
mm.
doing the Symphonie Fantastique. But not every conductor gets to 95 and can still stand up in front of an orchestra and lead a big symphony like that.
Mm, mhm.
So it brings me back to Mahler, because Mahler, who died at 51, am I correct? Age 51,
50.
always had the shadow of death. And God forbid if you and I would, I don't think we do. But nonetheless, it factors into creative calculations, if that's the term.
Mm,
And it's something I think about a lot. It doesn't paralyze me, but it's something that impels me to use my time really well and to be able to edit and make choices very actively, and to put aside things that are not as crucial to me. And I hate to say Mozart's not as crucial to me, but he comes in, third or fourth or fifth for me.
right.
And I do as much Mozart as I can, but I don't do him as much as I do some of the others. Other people could live in Mozart, or I know people who entirely live in Bach.
Mm, mhm. Yes.
Bach is their world, and they don't go anywhere else from that. And I don't criticize that. I understand it. That would not be me. But
Mm,
I fully understand people who entirely live for Bach, and he informs them of everything they feel they need to know. He
mhm.
changes their life. Maybe you have that with Mahler.
Definitely.
And it's a thrilling, enriching, life-sustaining experience.
Mm,
And but I guess the word I'm getting to is, Aaron, that not only is your life sustained, but you are sustaining a vision.
mm, mhm.
And when you sustain a vision, it's thrilling, it's exhilarating, but there are responsibilities that come with that.
It's true.
You thought about that at your younger age.
True. But this just feels like such a labor of love for me that it doesn't feel like work in the traditional sense, and
Yeah.
it's not it's play. And I get to spend my time with my greatest musical, passion. So it doesn't feel, I've literally days ago just finished season 3 after a pretty wild year and a half working on it, and I can't wait to get started on season 4. I mean,
Okay.
so it's not it's because I think I would miss having that in my life if it weren't there.
So to
But Fred,
conclude,
you mentioned, I thought
what?
Rossini's got to be up there for you too,
Oh,
right?
Rossini's my man.
Yes, that's
Um,
what I thought. So
just
where does he fit with Verdi and
music. I
Wagner
mean, the
with you?
thing is, musically, I say this a lot when I'm asked to name my favorite operas. I'll name one or two Wagners, one or two Verdis, a Mozart, a Berlioz, some others,
Uh-huh.
a Umberto Giordano, just for fun, and then I say in every note written by Rossini, and I mean that.
Yes, I've heard
And
you say that.
what I get captured by with Rossini is the following: that I genuinely believe, and if there must be medical testing and blood tests to do this, or brain scans to do this, that every single one of us physically beats our heart or experiences our life-giving source on the music of one or another composer. Not that we
Mhm.
love that composer's life or anything, but I feel healthy listening to Rossini. I just feel lighter, I feel cleaner, I feel nourished. having nothing to do with the content of what the music is, because with Rossini, his music could be comedic or tragic or melodramatic or any number of things, and God help me, sound the same, if you know what I mean. But it's fantastic in the way it sounds the same.
Yeah.
Whereas, and to me, Rossini and Berlioz are the two where I feel most physically connected to them.
Hmm.
Whereas Verdi, who I adore, and Wagner, who I revere, and I've never put it that way before, but there we go, adore and revere.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel that they are my life's blood.
Huh. Hmm.
And that's no criticism of them. I just think, I mean, all those Bach people who just feel Bach and he feeds their soul and their everything, that's great.
Yeah.
And you may be that with Mahler. But
Absolutely.
with Rossini, for me, for example, it's not analytical,
Mm.
it's physical.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I could sit down and analyze Wagner with you very quickly, or Mozart, or any number of others. I could analyze Rossini, but I don't want to. I can analyze Berlioz, but I don't want to. I just want to live those two composers
Mm.
to my
Mm.
marrow. And I do as often as possible. And, you know, if I put on WQXR and they suddenly have some Rossini, I sit up, I feel good. I
Mhm.
just feel the pain has been lifted. It's like Violetta. Not that I have a lot of pain, but you know, let's sound tired or achy, whatever. By the end of listening to that music, she says, Traviata, ma io sento rinasce, rinasce. I feel like I'm being reborn. And that's what happens for me with Rossini and
Mhm.
Berlioz.
Mhm.
You refer to the composer as Mahler, not Gustav. I refer to him as Rossini, but the only composer I refer to by his first name is Hector,
Uh-huh.
as in Berlioz. He's Hector to me.
Uh-huh.
And I feel a level of intimacy, not with his life story, because it's not a pretty one, but just something about the immediacy of his music in my bloodstream.
Mm.
It's Hector. It has to be Hector.
Huh.
And not Giuseppe, and not Richard, and not Joachino, and not Wolfgang. It's not, but
Uh-huh.
it's Hector, and always has been.
He speaks to you on a first name basis. That's it, you know.
Well,
That's
I don't think he speaks much to me at all, but I hear
musically, yes.
musically. But Aaron, what I would like to do in concluding, apart from thanking you very much, is to have you give out the websites and ways that people can access all of your work, because you are a gem that not everyone gets to see, because you are a genuinely modest person, and there are very few of them in our business. And therefore, I want people to be able to find your work. How will they do that?
Okay, well, thank you, Fred. The first place to
Yeah.
go is theworldofgustavmahler.org. That's the website for the Mahler podcast. We have all 3 seasons there. You can listen to all 3 seasons there, or you can go to whatever podcast platform you use to listen to podcasts and just search Embrace Everything. The complete title of the series is Embrace Everything, The World of Gustav Mahler. So, and that the phrase, I should say, embrace everything, is something that Mahler said to Sibelius. They were discussing music, and Mahler told him the symphony has to sound like the world. It must embrace everything. And so that's where we got the title. So there's the 3 seasons together is more than 7 hours of material to listen to. Season 3, we just finished it this week, so brand new. The other programs that we've discussed, The Ring and I, and Clash of the Titans, and the Strauss program is actually called Music is a Holy Art, which is a
song
from one of his operas.
Composer in Ariadne of Naxos.
Yes. Who is actually speaking, Strauss's thoughts. That's what Strauss felt. Music is a holy art. So those 3 programs, if you go to
Heilige Kunst. Yeah.
Yes. If you go to WQXR.org and search for my name, Aaron Cohen, you'll see all my productions will come up.
Very good.
Yeah. Hope you enjoy them.
Aaron, keep up the good work.
Well, thank you for inviting me to do this. This has been such a treat for me and so much
Of
fun.
course. I wanted the world to know the guy that I know and understand the passion that goes into this and the talent and the persistence and all of that. But you know, in our times now, everything is so chopped up into little bits that when you find someone who's passionate about big projects and big ideas, you want to bring his work to wider attention. And that's why I follow what you do, and I'm happy when you ask me to participate in what you do. But nonetheless, I want people who have never known your work to discover you today. And so
Well, thank
that's
you,
my
Fred. I
platform. Yeah.
appreciate it so much. Thank you for inviting me to this.
And I look forward to hearing the fourth season.
Yes, me too.
Okay. Aaron Cohen, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Fred.
Sure.